In Conversation with Nedbank, discussing all the insights, expectations and predictions ahead of the B20 Summit on 702.
The Clement Manyathela Show in conversation with Nedbank about the B20 Summit here on 702. As you know now, from the 18th to the 20th of November, business leaders from across the globe will be gathering in Johannesburg for the B20 Summit. And there are so many discussions that will be on the table, including how inclusive growth and prosperity can be achieved through global cooperation and develop policy recommendations that will inform the G20's decision-making process. So today we're in conversation with Amith Singh, who's the head of Power and Renewable Finance at Nedbank, corporate investment banking, and we are discussing all the insights, the expectations, and predictions ahead of the summit here on 702, brought to you by Nedbank, proud sponsors of the B20 Summit. Nedbank is a licensed FSP and registered credit provider. Amith Singh, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let's start by talking about the B20 Summit, because it's not something that most people are actually familiar with. What exactly is its role and how does it link to the G20?
So, good morning. I think that's a great question. So we all know the G20 and the context of the G20. It's a political-driven, policy-driven summit where world leaders come together trying to find some resolutions to global issues. So what the B20 does is it's a summit that happens before the G20 where business element to assist with policy initiatives is discussed and some consensus is driven and obtained through that space. For example, on the energy space, we were trying to get some consensus of how the world should use its sustainability model. What can we do in terms of empowering or powering the world, the climate crisis, all those agendas, and bring a business element into that so that when the policymakers eventually do meet and the heads of states, it's well tuned in. And of course, it helps make it policy into a reality. Otherwise, it just becomes a talk shop. Because business plays a very, very big role in implementing policy. So that's basically what the B20 will be doing. Yeah. And it's just not a summit for a few days. It's been a whole years of hard work with many subcommittees, and Nedbank's been driving the energy mix and the sustainability thing through our chairman, Mr. Daniel Manele, where he's chairing that subcommittee. So that's why we are very vested in this part of the B20, where we have prepared a paper, the committee has prepared a paper, policy paper, and that will be discussed. And of course, be given to the policymakers and heads of states to use that in their deliberations during the summit.
Yeah, and of course, in the lead up to G20, as you say, there have been lots also under discussion. You have said that it's not just geography, but credible frameworks that make a project, for instance, bankable. Can you just unpack that for us? You know, what exactly makes a framework credible enough for investors to actually take a bet on?
Yes, thank you. I think that so on the energy space of it, why this G20 summit and the B20 summit is so important, and why we think it's an important leverage for Africa to promote and use our message, so that we always know there's a narrative of more than 600 million Africans that don't have access to electricity. How can this summit change that narrative? Because we know power is the oxygen of any economy. Without that, we won't have economic prosperity, industrializations. We all know what it felt like with no power during the load shedding crisis in South Africa. So the rest of the continent, it's quite dark, and living without power is almost a way of life. So how do we change that? So that's why we think the summit is an important opportunity for us to send that message of Africa, and how do we change it? And of course, how do you deliver projects that gives power, both generation and transmission in the continent? The first step is policy, government policy, support and frameworks from the multinational agencies, the World Bank, the large development agencies. How do they support South Africa and the African continent in developing these policies? So it sets the path for private sector investment and institutions like Nedbank to put our capital and our money in there to realize power projects, which I spoke about economic prosperity and how that all links up in changing the narrative of Africa's unemployment, growth, and really prosperity in the long run. So that is why the power part of it is quite an important element of this summit. And we hope that it still remains a very topical thing. You know, so much of geopolitics happening in the world. And historically, the power and the energy transition has been a big element of this. But we hope that it still remains an important agenda in the world leaders framework.
Yeah, because also we've been talking about access to power for so many years, and you've got about 600 million still Africans who still live without electricity. So let's hope those shifts happen and they happen soon enough. You've pointed before to South Africa's renewable program as one that's actually worked. What do you think we've been able to get right that the rest of the continent can learn from?
Yes, good. And I think that's such a great success story. You know, we listen to the news in South Africa and so many bad things we're hearing, but we have something to celebrate about. 15 years ago, we embarked on the journey of renewables, energy transition. How about getting more modern grids up and going? And it was difficult initially, but through the South African government policy, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Procurement Program, the REAP program as it's known, it's been set a benchmark internationally and something where the continent can learn, where government's given fantastic framework, where private sector can develop projects in wind, solar, and other technologies. Now we're getting gas in terms of the new program. And how they develop this government framework so that it creates a good environment for capital, both independent power producers who develop the projects and institutions like Nedbank to fund these projects. So the first thing that we did as a country, we developed policies, and that policy has been a great success. We have more than 10 gigawatts of renewables. And you may ask me a question, why do I keep mentioning renewables? Or is that the solution for the continent? We think, and I think historically and scientifically, it's one of the more important breakthroughs in the last 2-3 decades in terms of energy. You know, as the phone lines, we leapfrog from telephone lines to cellular. So renewables, it has a big potential of being decentralized in the continent. It's the cheapest and lowest form of generation, the quickest to come online. And that is why it's an important technology for the continent. So that's why the South African government, we had huge climate commitments in terms of our Paris commitment. And that's why renewables play an important role. But going back to your question, so the South African government policy, the support of the guarantees from National Treasury, it made it a bankable framework. And that's why we could get capital in. And of course, the program was also a very good program. There was no, it was well procured, very transparent. It was developed through world standards. And that is why the continent can learn from South Africa. We have so much to be proud in terms of our energy journey. We've started it, and now we are sprinting into a very, very great space.
Yeah. And I wonder if this also gives us an opportunity to have conversations about funding, because we always talk about funding when we talk about the just renewable energy. Now that all these countries are coming here, is that an opportunity to negotiate more of that capital?
100%. And I think what it does, it shows to the world that Africa is an investable continent. And that the climate is good. It's politically, we have some problems here and there in few jurisdictions, but there's many good countries where you can put your capital. So we have an opportunity to showcase that. And of course, with that environment and the perception of the continent, if that changes, then that naturally attracts capital. So that's the biggest thing that we can say. And of course, we can also send the narrative of the demand and the need for such a capital. We know that there's so much of money that's committed to the continent in terms of energy transition and sustainability, but realistically, very little flows to real projects and real transition and impact projects. So now I think it's a role of business and banks like Nedbank and our independent power producers is to use this opportunity to send the message that we are ready for this capital and we are ready for international investment. The climate is good. Come and invest and let us grow the continent and make it a bright, shining spark in the world.
Yeah. If you had one message for global leaders that are coming here next week ahead of this G20, what would it be?
Yes, I think what is important for me is that the continent is not closed for business. I think that's a big thing. One big sector that they can invest in is in the energy space, to allow the companies and the institutions that they in their home countries to come and encourage them to come and invest in the power sector in the continent. I think that's my big thing, both in generation, transmission, modernizing our networks. It's a huge opportunity for them. And you must understand, in the real context of energy transition, most of the critical minerals comes out of Africa. So as a continent, we should also benefit from it. And I think we should not be apologetic about that and almost demand that they come and invest and establish their investments in the continent in the power sector. So that's my message to them. And of course, they should also support the multilateral agencies that they are shareholders and stuff to come and help develop these frameworks, use South Africa as an important benchmark and test case so that they can implement in the rest of the continent.
Amith Singh, thank you so much for speaking to us. We'll see you next week.
Yes, thank you, and really, really exciting time, and I hope South Africa is feeling the energy of this G20 and B20.
Yeah.
It's an important platform, and we have to show the world that we are ready for business.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amith Singh, Head of Power and Renewables Finance at Nedbank Corporate and Investment Banking.